Ethan Hale was born into a world where everything came easy. He had never known what it felt like to struggle, to wait, or to earn something through hard work. His father, Richard Hale, was one of the richest businessmen in the city, owning a chain of luxury hotels that stretched across the country. From a young age, Ethan had everything handed to him. Fancy cars, designer clothes, private tutors, and vacations in exotic places. While most kids his age were learning how to save money, Ethan was learning how to spend it. People around him treated him like royalty. Wherever he went, people smiled, opened doors for him, and said yes to everything he wanted. No one ever dared to tell him he was wrong. Because he was the billionaire's son, over time that attention filled him with pride. He started believing he was better than others. He thought money and power made him important. When Ethan turned 23, his father decided it was time for him to learn the business. Richard invited him to take part in the daily operations of their hotels. But Ethan wasn't interested. To him, business meetings and hotel inspections sounded boring. He preferred parties, fast cars, and showing off on social media. He would often post pictures of himself with luxury watches or expensive dinners, captioning them with words like, "Born to rule," and "Not everyone deserves my time." Despite his arrogance, Richard still hoped his son would change. He wanted Ethan to become a man who respected people, not one who only cared about wealth. So one morning, Richard called Ethan into his office. The large glass windows behind him showed a view of the city skyline. Ethan entered, dressed in an expensive suit, sunglasses still on, and greeted his father casually. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" Richard looked at him calmly. "Ethan, I want you to visit one of our hotels this week. The staff there have been working very hard. I want you to check the service, talk to the manager, and report back to me." Ethan frowned. "You want me to go check on waiters and cleaners? Dad, that's what managers are for. I don't need to waste my time doing that," he said carelessly, leaning back in the chair. Richard sighed. He could see how far his son had drifted from humility. "Ethan," he said in a firm voice, "if you're going to inherit this company one day, you need to understand every part of it, including the people who make it run." Ethan didn't argue further, but in his heart, he didn't take it seriously. To him, this was just another task he needed to complete to keep his father happy. He nodded and replied lazily, "Fine, I'll go, but don't expect me to enjoy it." The next day, Ethan arrived at one of their 5-star hotels in a shiny black sports car. The valet hurried to open the door, and Ethan stepped out, wearing expensive shoes that probably cost more than the valet's monthly salary. As he entered the hotel lobby, guests and staff turned to look at him. His confident walk and proud expression made it clear he thought he owned the place. And technically, he did, but the way he carried himself showed more arrogance than leadership. He barely noticed the staff greeting him politely. He didn't respond to the receptionist's warm, "Good morning, sir." Instead, he simply handed her his sunglasses and said, "Take care of these, they're worth more than your paycheck," and walked off. The receptionist froze for a second, hurt by his words, but she forced a smile and carried on with her job. Ethan walked into the restaurant area, where guests were enjoying their breakfast. He scanned the place and thought, "This is all mine. Someday I'll run this empire, and everyone here will answer to me." He didn't see the tired faces of the waiters or the effort behind the perfect service. He only saw people he believed were beneath him. He sat at a table and ordered his breakfast, snapping his fingers at the waitress without even looking at her. "Hey you, bring me coffee, strong, no sugar," he said, his voice sharp and impatient. The waitress, named Lily, smiled kindly and replied, "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." Her politeness didn't impress him. He saw it as something he deserved. As he waited, he opened his phone and began scrolling through his social media, posting a photo of his breakfast with the caption, "Starting the day like a king." While hundreds of followers commented and praised his luxury lifestyle, he smiled proudly, feeling untouchable. What Ethan didn't know was that this simple visit, which he treated like a joke, was about to change his entire life. He didn't realize that his arrogance would soon be tested in a way that would shake his pride and teach him a lesson he would never forget. For now, he was still the spoiled billionaire's son. Confident, careless, and blind to the value of respect. But fate had already started preparing a surprise that would soon bring him down to earth. Lily had been working at the Hale Grand Hotel for almost 2 years. She wasn't from a rich family, but she had something that money could never buy. A kind heart and a strong will. Every morning before the sun came up, she would leave her small apartment and take 2 buses just to reach the hotel on time. Her mother was sick and couldn't work anymore, so Lily had become the only person earning for both of them. She didn't complain though. She always said, "As long as I can take care of Mom, I'll be fine." At work, everyone respected her because of her attitude. Even when customers were rude or demanding, Lily never raised her voice. She always smiled and handled things calmly. She believed that kindness was stronger than anger. She was the kind of person who would help her coworkers even after her shift ended. Sometimes she stayed late to help the cleaning staff fold napkins or polish glasses. She didn't do it for attention. She did it because it felt right. The restaurant at the hotel was always busy in the mornings. Guests came in wearing business suits, tourists chatted over breakfast, and waiters rushed around to serve everyone. Lily moved quickly but gracefully, balancing trays and remembering orders with ease. The manager often said, "If every employee worked like Lily, we'd never have a single complaint." But Lily's life outside of work was far from easy. Her mother, Clara, was battling a long illness, and most of Lily's salary went into buying her medicines. Sometimes she barely had enough money left for herself. Yet, she never let her personal problems affect her work. When she felt tired, she would take a deep breath and remind herself why she was doing all this. For her mother's smile, for a better tomorrow. That morning, as Lily tied her apron and prepared the tables, she noticed a fancy car pulling up outside. It wasn't unusual. Rich guests often came and went, but this car was different. It was a shiny black sports car that looked more expensive than anything she had ever seen. A young man stepped out, wearing designer clothes and sunglasses even though it wasn't sunny inside the lobby. Lily didn't know who he was, but she could tell he wasn't an ordinary guest. There was something about the way he walked, confident, almost arrogant. A few minutes later, the manager called her and said, "Lily, please take care of the guest at table 5. He's from the owner's family, so make sure everything is perfect." Lily nodded politely and walked toward the table. She didn't care about the man's status. To her, every guest was the same. She just wanted to do her job well. As she reached the table, she smiled and said softly, "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Hale Grand Hotel. May I take your order?" Ethan looked up from his phone for a moment and barely acknowledged her. "Yeah. Get me coffee, strong, no sugar," he said sharply, without even looking at her face. Lily didn't mind. She had dealt with rude customers before. She simply nodded and said, "Right away, sir," and walked toward the counter. While preparing the coffee, one of her coworkers whispered, "That's the owner's son, Ethan Hale. He's super rich and kind of full of himself." Lily shrugged and replied quietly, "Doesn't matter. I'll treat him like every other guest." She believed that everyone deserved respect, even those who didn't show it in return. When she returned with his coffee, she carefully placed it on the table. But just as she was about to step back, a tiny drop of coffee spilled over the edge of the cup. It wasn't much, but it landed near Ethan's expensive watch. He looked down slowly, then raised his eyes to her, his face full of irritation. "Are you serious?" he snapped. "Can't you even serve coffee properly? Do you even know how much this watch costs?" Lily froze for a second. Her cheeks turned red. The restaurant went quiet. People nearby turned to look. She wanted to explain that it was just a small mistake, but Ethan didn't give her a chance. "Unbelievable," he said loudly. "I'll be telling your manager about this. Maybe you're not good enough to work here." For a moment, Lily felt tears sting her eyes, but she swallowed them back. She had learned long ago that reacting in anger never helped. She simply lowered her head slightly and said, "I'm very sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. I'll get you a new cup right away." Her calmness only made Ethan more annoyed. He waved his hand dismissively and muttered, "Just go, and try not to mess up again." Lily walked away silently, her hands shaking a little as she prepared another cup. Her coworkers watched in silence, some angry, some sympathetic. When she came back, She placed the new coffee on his table gently and said, "Here you go, sir. I hope this one's perfect." Ethan didn't respond. He just continued scrolling through his phone. Even after that, Lily didn't lose her composure. She went back to her duties, attending other guests with the same warm smile. Inside, her heart ached a little, but she reminded herself of her mother's words, "Never let someone's rudeness change your goodness." So she kept working, proving through her patience that true strength isn't about money or power. It's about character. That morning, Lily didn't realize that someone else had witnessed the entire scene. Someone who would change her life in ways she could never imagine. But for now, she continued her shift with quiet dignity, unaware that fate had already begun to write a new chapter in her story. The restaurant was filled with the soft sound of clinking dishes and the quiet chatter of guests enjoying their breakfast. The golden light of the morning sun came through the big windows, making everything look calm and peaceful. But that peace was about to break in an instant. Ethan Hale, the spoiled billionaire's son, sat at his table scrolling through his phone, barely noticing anyone around him. He looked bored, annoyed, and impatient. His coffee cup was half empty, and his expression showed he was not impressed with anything. Lily, the waitress who had served him earlier, was walking carefully between tables, making sure every guest had what they needed. She had already replaced his spilled coffee and hoped the situation was over. She didn't want any more trouble. Her goal was simple: finish her shift, earn her pay, and buy her mother's medicine on her way home. She took a deep breath and told herself to stay calm. But fate had other plans. As she passed Ethan's table again, she noticed his napkin had fallen on the floor. Trying to be polite, she bent down quickly to pick it up and place it back on the table. Just then, one of the new waiters carrying a tray of orange juice accidentally brushed her shoulder. It wasn't his fault. The restaurant was crowded. But that small bump made Lily's tray tilt, and before she could steady it, a few drops of water from a glass splashed onto Ethan's sleeve. Time froze for a moment. The sound of the glass clinking was tiny, but it felt loud enough to stop everyone nearby. Lily gasped softly and immediately said, "Oh my God! I'm so sorry, sir." She quickly took a napkin and tried to help, but Ethan stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. All eyes turned toward him. "Are you serious right now?" Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the restaurant. "Can't you even carry a glass of water without messing up? Do you even know how much this shirt costs?" He looked down at his sleeve, where only a few drops of water shone under the light, but he acted as if it were ruined. Lily's face turned pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to explain. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was just an accident. I'll clean it right away." But Ethan wasn't listening. His pride was bigger than the problem. "Accident?" he repeated sarcastically. "You people always have excuses, don't you? Do you even realize who I am?" The restaurant went completely silent. Even the soft music in the background couldn't hide the tension. Other guests looked uncomfortable, and the staff froze in place. Nobody dared to move. The manager, who had been standing near the counter, rushed forward quickly. "Sir, please, calm down. It was just a small mistake," he said nervously. But Ethan wasn't calm. "No, I won't calm down," he snapped, pointing at Lily. "I want her fired right now. I can't believe someone this clumsy works in my father's hotel. She's making this place look cheap." His harsh words cut through the air like knives. Lily stood there, her eyes wide and filled with hurt. She wanted to cry, but she didn't let herself. Her voice shook a little as she said softly, "I truly didn't mean to, sir. Please forgive me." She had faced rude guests before, but never like this. This was humiliation, pure and public. The manager looked helpless, unsure what to do. He knew Ethan was the owner's son, and no one wanted to risk their job by arguing with him. "Sir, please, I'll talk to her," he said in a small voice. "Please take your seat. We'll fix everything." Ethan glared at Lily one more time and muttered, "Pathetic." Before sitting back down heavily, he grabbed his phone and began typing something angrily, probably a complaint or a message to his father. Lily slowly walked toward the counter, her legs feeling weak. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. Whispers filled the air. Some people felt bad for her. Others just watched quietly. She placed the tray down and took a deep breath. Her coworker Anna came up to her and whispered, "Don't cry, Lily, he's just a spoiled brat." But Lily smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's okay, Anna, I'm fine," she said, though inside her heart was breaking a little. She didn't care about money or expensive clothes, but she cared deeply about her self-respect, and right now, it felt like someone had stomped on it. She wiped her eyes quickly, straightened her apron, and went back to serving other tables. Her hands were still shaking, but she refused to walk away. She needed this job, and she wasn't going to let one rude man ruin everything. What she didn't know was that someone else had seen the entire thing. From the first drop of water to the last word of insult, Richard Hale, Ethan's father, had arrived at the hotel unannounced that morning to check on operations, and he had been sitting quietly in a corner of the restaurant, watching everything unfold. He saw the anger in his son's eyes, the pride in his voice, and the tears Lily fought hard to hide. Richard's heart grew heavy. This was not the man he had raised his son to be. He didn't step in right away, though. He wanted to see how his son would handle himself after the outburst, but deep down, Richard already knew something had to change, and soon, while Ethan continued his breakfast as if nothing had happened, and Lily kept working with her quiet dignity, a storm was silently brewing in Richard's mind. He had seen enough to understand that his son's arrogance had crossed the line, and he was determined to teach him a lesson that he would never forget. Richard Hale sat quietly in a corner of the restaurant, hidden behind a newspaper, but his sharp eyes saw everything that had happened. He had arrived unannounced that morning to surprise the staff and see how the hotel was running. He believed that showing up without warning helped him understand the truth, how employees really behaved when no one was watching. But today what he saw broke his heart. He had expected to find small management issues or service complaints, not to witness his own son humiliating one of his waitresses in front of everyone. From his seat, Richard had watched the entire scene unfold. He saw the moment Lily accidentally spilled a few drops of water, and then he saw Ethan's reaction. The anger, the shouting, the harsh words that made the poor girl's eyes fill with tears. Richard felt a deep wave of disappointment wash over him. It wasn't just embarrassment as a hotel owner. It was pain as a father. He had worked his whole life to build his empire, not just to give his son wealth, but to give him values, and now all he could see was pride and arrogance standing where humility should have been. As Lily quietly went back to work, pretending to be fine, Richard couldn't take his eyes off her. She moved with grace, even after being insulted in front of everyone. She didn't shout. She didn't quit. She didn't even talk back. Instead, she kept serving other guests with the same calm smile. Richard admired that strength. He could tell she wasn't someone who gave up easily. Her dignity reminded him of himself in his younger days, when he had started from nothing, working as a bellboy in a small hotel before becoming the successful man he was today. He remembered his own struggles vividly, the long nights, the rude customers, and the times he had been treated like he was invisible. That's why he always taught his employees to respect each other, no matter their position. He had believed his son would carry that same mindset, but Ethan had grown up in comfort, surrounded by luxury, and now Richard realized that maybe he had given his son too much money, too much power, and not enough lessons about life. As Ethan finished his breakfast and continued scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of his father's presence, Richard sat in silence, thinking deeply. He thought about how different Lily and Ethan were. One had nothing but worked with pride, while the other had everything but lacked gratitude. It was a painful comparison, but it was the truth. After a while, Richard folded his newspaper and stood up slowly. No one noticed him except a few staff members who quickly bowed their heads respectfully. He nodded back gently and motioned for the manager to meet him in his office later. He didn't want to cause a scene now. His anger was burning inside, but he wasn't the kind of man who shouted in public. He preferred action over words. As he walked toward the elevator, he glanced one last time at Lily. She was helping an older couple find their table, her smile warm and polite as ever, despite what she had just gone through. Richard's respect for her grew even stronger. He whispered under his breath, "You handled yourself better than my own son," and stepped into the elevator. Back in his office, on the top floor of the hotel, Richard sat in his leather chair, staring out at the city skyline. The memory of the restaurant scene kept replaying in his mind. Ethan's words echoed. "Do you even realize who I am?" That sentence hit him hard. It wasn't pride, it was arrogance, and Richard knew that arrogance was poison. It destroyed empathy, respect, and eventually, a person's soul. He couldn't let his only son turn into a man who thought kindness was weakness. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. The manager entered nervously. "Sir, I didn't know you were visiting today," he said quickly. "I hope everything was up to your expectations." Richard looked at him for a long moment before replying. "I saw what happened downstairs." The manager froze, unsure what to say. "The waitress Lily, sir. She's one of our best workers. She didn't deserve that," Richard said firmly. "And my son. He behaved in a way that embarrassed this company and this family." The manager nodded slowly. "She's a very good employee, sir. Hardworking and polite." Richard's expression softened slightly. "Yes, I could see that," he replied. "Make sure she doesn't face any punishment because of what happened. Not a warning, not a complaint, nothing." The manager looked relieved and promised. "Of course, sir. I'll take care of it." After the manager left, Richard leaned back in his chair, thinking about what he should do next. He couldn't just scold Ethan. Words wouldn't be enough this time. His son needed to learn through experience, through humility. He needed to understand that real power wasn't in shouting or commanding people, but in respecting them. He picked up his phone and called his secretary. "Cancel my meetings for the afternoon," he said calmly. "I'll be handling something personal." As he hung up, a small but determined smile appeared on his face. He already had an idea forming in his mind. A plan that would not only open Ethan's eyes but also change him for the better. Downstairs, Ethan was still laughing at a message from his friends, completely unaware that his father had seen everything, unaware that his next few days were about to turn his world upside down. Fate, with a little help from his father, was preparing to teach him the hardest and most valuable lesson of his life. One that no amount of money could ever buy. That evening, the sky over the city turned orange as the sun slowly went down. Inside the hotel, the guests were finishing dinner, the lights were warm, and soft music played in the background. But on the top floor, in the private office of Richard Hale, the atmosphere was completely different. It was quiet, serious, and filled with tension. Richard sat behind his large wooden desk, waiting for his son to arrive. He had asked Ethan to meet him immediately after dinner, and he planned to finally talk about what happened that morning. Ethan walked in casually, still wearing his designer jacket, his phone in his hand, and a confident look on his face. "Hey Dad, you wanted to see me?" he asked, sitting down without waiting for permission. Richard didn't reply right away. He just looked at his son carefully. There was a long silence before he finally spoke. "Yes, Ethan, I wanted to ask you something important." Ethan leaned back in the chair, bored already. "Sure. What's up?" he said, expecting his father to ask about hotel finances or maybe praise him for visiting the property. But Richard's tone was calm and cold. "Tell me, son," he said slowly. "How did you treat the staff today?" Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. Richard kept his eyes on him. "I mean the people who work here. The waiters, the cleaners, the receptionist," he continued. "How did you behave with them?" Ethan shrugged carelessly. "You mean that waitress who spilled water on me? She was careless, Dad. Totally unprofessional. I just told her off, no big deal," he said with a little laugh. Richard's face didn't move, but inside, his heart sank. "No big deal," he repeated quietly. "You shouted at her, humiliated her in front of the entire restaurant, and called her useless. Ethan, is that how you think a leader behaves?" Ethan looked uncomfortable for a second but quickly defended himself. "Dad, come on. I didn't mean it like that. I was just angry. And besides, it's not like she lost her job or something. She should learn to do her work properly." Richard leaned forward, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "And what makes you think you have the right to decide how someone should be treated? Do you think being rich makes you better than others?" Ethan rolled his eyes. "Dad, please, don't turn this into a lecture. You always say people should take their work seriously. I was just holding her accountable." Richard sighed deeply. "No, Ethan, you weren't holding her accountable. You were holding your ego above her dignity." His words hit like a weight in the room. You disrespected someone who was doing her job with honesty, someone who earns in a month what you spend on a single watch. Ethan stayed quiet for a few seconds, trying to come up with an excuse, but Richard didn't give him a chance. Do you know what true strength is, son? He asked. It's not in shouting at people or showing power. It's in how you treat those who can't do anything for you. Ethan looked away, uncomfortable. You're overreacting, Dad. It's not that serious, he muttered. But Richard's next words made him sit up straight. It's serious enough for me to question whether you're ready to inherit this business. Ethan's eyes widened. What? Are you kidding me? He said, almost laughing in disbelief. I'm not, Richard said firmly. I built this empire with respect, not arrogance. Every person working in this hotel is part of that success. But you, Ethan, you don't see that. You think this place runs on money, but it runs on people. People like that waitress you insulted. For the first time, Ethan didn't have a quick reply. He looked down, his fingers tightening around his phone. A mix of guilt and confusion started creeping into his mind. But he still didn't want to admit he was wrong. So what do you want me to do? Apologize to her? He asked, trying to sound confident. Richard stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the glowing city below. I want you to learn, Ethan, he said quietly. And sometimes, learning doesn't come from words. It comes from consequences. Ethan frowned, not understanding. What are you planning to do? He asked cautiously. Richard turned back to him, his face serious but calm. You'll find out soon enough, he said. For now, go home and think about what I said. Really think about it. His tone left no room for argument. Ethan wanted to ask more, but something in his father's eyes told him it was better not to. He stood up slowly, frustrated. Fine, whatever, he said, grabbing his jacket and heading toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back and said, You're taking this too seriously, Dad. People make mistakes. Richard's voice followed him, steady and firm. Yes, they do, son, but not everyone refuses to learn from them. As Ethan walked out, the door closed softly behind him. Richard remained by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His heart heavy but determined. He knew his son needed a lesson that no amount of money could buy. A lesson about respect, humility, and what it truly means to be a leader. That night, as Ethan drove home in his luxury car, he played loud music to drown out his thoughts. He tried to shake off his father's words, but deep down, something in him felt uneasy. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the biggest lesson of his life. One that would change not just how he saw others, but how he saw himself. The next morning began like any other day at the Hale Grand Hotel. The lobby was filled with guests checking out. The restaurant was busy with breakfast orders, and the staff moved quickly from one table to another, making sure everything was perfect. The atmosphere was normal. At least for everyone except Richard Hale. He had spent the entire night thinking about how to teach his son a lesson that he would never forget. Words alone wouldn't be enough. Ethan needed to face a situation that would open his eyes to the truth, and Richard knew exactly how to do it. Early that morning, Richard called the hotel manager to his office. I want all staff in the main hall at noon, he said. I have an important announcement to make. The manager nodded quickly, thinking it was just about business, but Richard didn't explain anything more. He simply said, Make sure my son is there too. By lunchtime, word had spread through the hotel that the owner himself was going to speak. Everyone was curious and excited. Even the kitchen staff stopped what they were doing to listen. Ethan arrived a few minutes late, walking in with his usual confidence, wearing a designer shirt and holding his phone. He smiled lazily at the staff as he entered, assuming his father was going to praise him for visiting the hotel and being involved in management. He had no idea that this meeting was actually about him. Richard stood at the front of the hall, his expression calm but serious. The moment Ethan walked in, their eyes met, and Ethan noticed something different about his father's face. A kind of quiet firmness, not anger, but something stronger. Richard cleared his throat, and the room went silent. Good afternoon, everyone, he began. I want to take a few minutes to appreciate the hard work you all do every single day. The staff smiled and clapped softly, feeling proud. Richard continued. Running a hotel like this isn't easy. It takes dedication, teamwork, and respect for one another. His voice grew deeper. And respect, my friends, is the most important ingredient in success. He paused and let his words sink in. Ethan crossed his arms, listening casually, still unaware of what was coming next. Richard looked toward Lily, who was standing quietly near the back, still wearing her waitress uniform. Yesterday, I saw something that made me think deeply, he said. I saw one of our staff members handle a difficult situation with more grace and professionalism than many people twice her rank. Everyone turned to look at Lily. She looked shocked and nervous, unsure what was happening. Richard continued. This young woman showed patience, dignity, and true strength. Even when she was disrespected in front of others, she didn't respond with anger or pride. She responded with calm and respect, and that, my friends, is what true leadership looks like. He gestured for Lily to come forward, and the crowd clapped for her. She hesitated but slowly walked to the front, cheeks slightly red. Ethan's smile began to fade. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling the eyes of the room on him. A small voice in his head started to whisper that this might be about him. Then Richard took a deep breath and said clearly, From today onward, I am promoting Lily to the position of floor supervisor. There was a moment of silence, and then a wave of applause filled the hall. The staff cheered for her. Some even whistled happily. Lily stood frozen, completely surprised. Sir, I don't know what to say, she stammered. Thank you so much. Richard smiled warmly and replied. You don't need to say anything, Lily. You earned it. Ethan's face turned pale. He looked around in disbelief, trying to understand what was happening. Wait, what? He said loudly. You're promoting a waitress? Just like that? The room went quiet again. Richard looked at him calmly. Yes, Ethan, I am, he said. She showed qualities that every leader should have. Kindness, control, and humility. Things that can't be bought with money. Ethan's pride burned inside him. But Dad, she made a mistake. She spilled water on me, he said, his voice rising. And now you're rewarding her for that? Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. No, son, he replied. I'm rewarding her for how she handled your mistake. The words hit Ethan like a slap. He looked down, his face red with embarrassment. He could feel everyone staring at him. Richard turned back to the staff and said, This hotel doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to everyone who works hard to make it what it is. Remember this. Respect is not a gift you give to the rich. It's a value that everyone deserves. The staff clapped again, many of them smiling proudly. Some even looked at Ethan with a mix of pity and disappointment. Lily's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She couldn't believe the owner himself had recognized her. She looked at Ethan for a brief second, not with anger, but with quiet forgiveness, and that made him feel even smaller. He didn't know what to say. He just turned his face away. When the meeting ended, people gathered around Lily to congratulate her. Richard walked past Ethan and said softly, I hope you were listening, son, and walked out of the hall. Ethan stood there silently, his heart heavy and his pride broken. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one being praised. He was the one being taught. That day, the spoiled billionaire's son realized something important. Power and money could buy attention, but not respect. And no matter how rich he was, it was clear that real success came from the heart, not from the wallet. It was a moment he would never forget, and one that would begin to change him forever. That evening, after the meeting, the whole hotel buzzed with excitement. Everyone was talking about Lily's promotion and how the owner himself had recognized her. Many staff members smiled proudly whenever they passed her, saying things like, Congratulations, you deserve it. Lily thanked everyone politely, still unable to believe what had happened. She felt like she was dreaming. Yesterday she was just a waitress who tried her best to do her job right. And today, she was the new floor supervisor. It was a huge change for her, and she silently promised herself to work even harder. But not everyone was smiling that night. Ethan sat alone in one of the hotel's private lounges, staring out the large glass window. His usual confidence was gone. His phone was on the table, but for once, he didn't care about taking selfies or checking messages. His mind was spinning with what had happened earlier. The humiliation still burned inside him. He had never been embarrassed like that in his life. especially not in front of the staff. He could still hear his father's voice saying, "I'm rewarding her for how she handled your mistake." Those words echoed again and again in his mind. Every time he thought about it, his stomach twisted. Part of him wanted to be angry. Angry at Lily for making him look bad. Angry at his father for embarrassing him publicly. But deep inside, another feeling had started to grow. Something new. Guilt. For the first time, Ethan began to question himself. He thought about how rude he had been to Lily. The way he had spoken to her like she was nothing. The way he had mocked her in front of everyone. He remembered the look in her eyes. Calm but sad. She never fought back. She never raised her voice. She just took his cruelty silently and kept doing her job. Now, when he thought about it, he realized how wrong he had been. He leaned back in the chair and whispered to himself, "What have I become?" He thought about all the times he had treated people badly just because he could. He remembered how he once made a valet run 3 times just because he forgot his phone in the car, how he laughed when a cleaner dropped a tray of glasses, how he ignored staff greetings like they didn't exist. At that moment, Ethan saw himself clearly. Not as the rich, powerful man he imagined, but as someone who had lost his sense of humanity. Later that night, Richard walked into the lounge and saw his son sitting quietly. It was unusual, because Ethan was never quiet. "You're still here?" Richard said, walking closer. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just sighed. "Dad," he said finally. "Why did you do that? In front of everyone?" His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was tired and confused. Richard sat across from him, his tone calm. "Because, Ethan, you needed to see what respect really means," he said. "I've told you before, but you never listened. You think money makes people respect you. But that's not true. It only makes them afraid of you. Real respect has to be earned." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes down. "I know," he said softly. "I messed up, didn't I?" Richard smiled slightly. "You did," he replied. "But realizing it is the first step to changing." He leaned forward and continued. "Do you know why I promoted Lily? It wasn't just because of what happened. It's because she reminds me of how I started. I worked hard. I treated everyone with respect. And that's why people followed me. Not because of money, but because of trust." Ethan looked up. His father's words hit him deeply. For years, he had admired his father's power and wealth, but he never thought about how he earned it. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't want to be like the person I was today." His voice broke slightly. "I don't want people to hate me." Richard smiled proudly. "Then start changing, son. It's never too late," he said. "Go and make things right. Not for me, but for yourself." With that, he stood up and patted Ethan on the shoulder before leaving. Ethan sat there for a long time, thinking about what his father said. The next morning, he woke up early. Something he almost never did. Instead of his usual expensive clothes, he wore a simple shirt and walked down to the restaurant. The staff were surprised to see him there so early. Everyone expected him to be cold and distant like always. But this time, he greeted them softly, saying "Good morning," which left them speechless. Then he saw Lily arranging breakfast tables. She looked focused as always, when she noticed Ethan walking toward her. Her hands froze for a second. She didn't know what to expect. Maybe another insult. But Ethan stopped in front of her and took a deep breath. "Lily," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you." She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Sir?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "You didn't deserve that," he said honestly. "I was rude, and I'm sorry." Lily looked at him for a moment, trying to read his expression, but his eyes were different this time. Not proud, not cold, just sincere. She smiled gently and said, "It's okay, sir. Thank you for saying that." Ethan smiled slightly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time in his life, he felt good. Not because of money or fame, but because he did something right. As he walked away, he looked around the restaurant and saw the staff differently now. Not as servants, but as people, each one working hard to make the place shine. That day, something truly changed inside him. He didn't know it yet, but this small step of humility would open a new chapter in his life. One where he would finally start becoming the man his father always hoped he'd be. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the hotel began to feel different. Everyone noticed that Ethan wasn't the same person anymore. The arrogant and spoiled billionaire's son who used to walk around with pride and attitude was now more quiet, polite, and respectful. He started spending more time observing how things really worked in the hotel, instead of just showing off his family name. It was like he had finally opened his eyes to a world he had ignored his whole life. One morning, Ethan decided to join the hotel staff for their regular briefing. The employees were surprised to see him there. Most of them expected him to act like a boss again, but this time, he stood among them, not above them. When the manager began discussing daily tasks, Ethan actually listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions about customer service and guest experience. The same man who once mocked waiters was now trying to learn from them. It was a sight no one had expected to see. Later that day, Ethan walked into the restaurant and found Lily talking with the new waiters, teaching them how to handle guests politely. He waited until she finished before walking up to her. "You're really good at this," he said, smiling sincerely. "The staff seem to respect you a lot." Lily smiled, a little shyly. "Thank you, sir. I just try to treat them how I wanted to be treated when I was in their place," she replied. Her words made Ethan pause for a moment, and he said softly, "That's something I should have learned long ago." Lily could tell he meant it. She nodded kindly. "It's never too late to learn, sir," she said, and those simple words stayed in Ethan's mind the whole day. They echoed like a reminder. A reminder that change wasn't about saying sorry once. It was about becoming a better person every day. In the following weeks, Ethan began doing things no one expected. He would help the staff during busy hours, carry trays, talk to guests politely, and even thank the cleaners after they finished their shift one afternoon. A guest accidentally spilled juice on the table, and instead of calling for help, Ethan quickly grabbed a napkin and cleaned it himself. A few waiters saw him and couldn't believe their eyes. This was the same man who once yelled at people for far smaller things. Now he was smiling and helping without hesitation. Word of his change soon reached his father, Richard, who watched quietly from a distance. He didn't say anything at first. He just observed how his son interacted with people. One evening, he saw Ethan helping an elderly couple find their lost luggage, walking them all the way to their room. When they thanked him, he smiled genuinely and said, "It's my pleasure, sir." Richard's heart swelled with pride. This was the son he had always hoped to see. That night, Richard called Ethan to his office again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of tension, there was warmth. "You've been busy lately?" Richard said with a smile. "I've seen the way you're working with the staff." Ethan smiled shyly and said, "Yeah, I've been trying to understand the business better." Richard raised an eyebrow and replied, "No, son, you've been trying to understand people better, and that's what matters most." Ethan looked down, a little emotional. "You were right, Dad," he said quietly. "I thought money was everything, but now I see that respect is worth more than all of it." Richard nodded proudly. "That's the lesson I wanted you to learn," he said. "Leadership is not about power, it's about kindness. When people respect you for who you are, not what you have, that's when you truly win." The next morning, Ethan called all the staff to the main hall. Everyone gathered curiously, wondering what this meeting was about. When he stepped forward, there was no arrogance in his face, no pride in his voice, just honesty. "I owe everyone here an apology," he said softly. "I've been rude and disrespectful in the past. I treated people like they were less important, and that was wrong. You all make this hotel what it is, and I want to thank each of you for that." The room fell silent. The staff were touched. Some even teared up. No one expected this level of humility from him. Then Ethan turned toward Lily. "And especially to you, Lily," he said. "Thank you for showing me what real strength and respect look like. I learned from you more than I ever did from my expensive schools." Lily smiled warmly, clapping her hands softly, and soon the entire room followed. Everyone applauded, not just for his apology, but for his growth. After the meeting, Ethan felt lighter, like a huge burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He realized that his father's punishment had actually been a gift, a lesson that changed his life forever. From that day on, he continued working closely with the hotel team, learning every small detail about the business, not from a distance, but by getting his hands dirty alongside everyone else. Years later, when Richard decided to step down and hand over the company, he didn't hesitate to choose Ethan, not because he was his son, but because he had finally earned it. Ethan stood before the employees, now as the new CEO, but when he spoke, his words were humble. "This company doesn't belong to me," he said with a gentle smile. "It belongs to all of us, to every person who works hard every single day, together." The staff cheered and clapped, and among them stood Lily, proud and smiling. Ethan had finally transformed from a spoiled billionaire's son into a true leader, one who had learned that the greatest power a person can have is not wealth or status, but the ability to respect and value others from the heart.